Hello, welcome to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. Many strides have been made over the years to better understand the problem of driving while intoxicated and to create and enforce the right laws to combat it. However, a new and more difficult challenge has surfaced. Drug driving is much more difficult to detect and classify than drunk driving. And recently, the House Transportation Committee, of which I'm a member, held a public hearing at Gwynedd Mercy University in Lower Gwynedd Township to hear testimony from those on the front lines of the problem. We heard from our county district attorney, as well as several members of local law enforcement, as they informed us of what they see on a day-to-day basis. On this month's program, I want to share highlights of that hearing with you.
This is one of a series of hearings and the beginning of legislative initiatives on distracted driving, DUI, and drug driving. This is really part of a task force that is comprised of members of the Transportation Committee and the Judiciary Committee in the House. That task force and our key member, Representative Harper, was responsible for the ignition interlock legislation that we passed and was signed by the governor back in late June. This is a continuation of a lot of work, and we have a DUI bill that was just introduced and is in our committee that we'll be addressing in the fall as well. And before I turn it over to Chairman Harper, because she is again the member of the task force, and also we are in her district, I'd like to recognize Chairman Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reiterate the comments you said. The DUI bill was a very important bill, but I think we look on that as the first step, and this is a continuation of that good work, and hopefully we're going to learn a lot here today, and we'll be able to move forward with the bills concerning this. Thank you.
Chairman Harper.
Thank you. Several years ago, I participated in the task force that actually wrote our current driving under the influence law. The impetus for that was that the national standard had become 0.08 blood alcohol content level, and we had to adjust Pennsylvania's laws to take that into account. We held hearings like this. We actually discovered that the most dangerous drunk driver is one who's 0.5 or above and who has previously been caught drunk driving. So when we went and wrote the bill, what we did was we did a matrix of penalties so that the more times you'd been arrested and the higher your blood alcohol content level when you were arrested, the worse the punishment. And what we were trying to do naturally was to stop or limit drunk driving. So that law's been in effect for several years. It's working pretty well. But we have a new problem that we have to deal with, and that is drug driving. In other words, it's often the case that a person has more than just alcohol in their system when they are stopped for driving under the influence. And the question is, what can we do to adjust our intoxication laws, basically, to prevent accidents where people get killed or maimed or hurt because of drug driving along with drunk driving or some combination. But it's actually harder to do that than it is to just set a standard like a 0.08 or 0.15. And the research is not as complete as it was on alcohol, so it's harder yet to know what is the right legislative response. So we're having the hearing today in Montgomery County because we're going around and trying to get information from all over the Commonwealth to help us write better laws. The ignition interlock law was a better law than the one we had in place, and because it would hopefully stop people from driving drunk because their car would shut them down, and those kinds of things are things that we're looking at. So this morning we've assembled a number of witnesses from law enforcement, guys out there in the street on the ground, and also prosecutors, and also people who have specific ideas about how we should revise or amend our laws in order to make them better. And that's why we're here. And the point is a collection of information. In Harrisburg, we're often inundated with information, but a hearing gives us the chance to ask questions from people who are out there every day doing it. So we're going to hear from District Attorney Kevin Steele from Montgomery County.
Increasingly, our DUI arrests are involving drugs, and either drugs alone or drugs and alcohol in some combination. Montgomery County prosecuted about the same number of the general impairment DUIs, alcohol DUIs. In 2006, it was 2,471 were prosecuted versus in 2015, 2,247. So in actuality, about the same number of DUI alcohol cases, actually with a slight downturn in that. Now, when you look at our DUI drug driving, which is DUI caused by drugs alone or drugs and alcohol in combination, it's a different story. The arrest and prosecution numbers have risen significantly. So in 2006, there were 1,067 cases. Now in 2015, that number has jumped to 1,751 cases. And when you drill down on those numbers, what the driver was consuming in terms of drugs has changed for the worse in terms of public safety. Drivers who consumed opioids like Oxycontin or heroin or other non-prescribed drugs, Schedule II, Schedule III drugs, almost doubled during that period of time, from 754 cases in 2006 to 1,417 in 2015. And I know that's something that you're hearing a lot about because of the rise of the heroin problem, fentanyl, and the other issues we're facing. Well, people are getting behind the wheel on those drugs. So increasingly, once arrested, more and more of our cases are going to trial also. DUI trials have increased significantly. So in 06, we had 8. 2015, we had 50 DUI-related trials. While these numbers are from Montgomery alone, I believe what we're hearing from our colleagues across the state is that this is mirroring what they're seeing also. So just threw a bunch of numbers at you, and I want to kind of get to what they mean. And I think the bottom line is what they mean is it is more dangerous for drivers on our roadways with people under the influence of these significant drugs. May of 2012, case I prosecuted personally, 15-year-old girl named Rachel Witt, 28-year-old fellow by the name of James Crawford, died in a horrible crash in Pottstown, our western edge of Montgomery County, which I know Mr. Hennessy's familiar with. The driver, Roger Malloy, was driving his grandmother's Lincoln Continental, high speed, caused the vehicle to become airborne on the corner of 10th and State Street. Vehicle struck a light pole before coming to a stop upside down. And what we learned through the investigation, and this is one of these that I get called out in the middle of the night on, there's a young girl laying in the road with a sheet over her, and the driver had been drinking alcohol and was high on synthetic drugs, synthetic drug called K2. And I know the legislature has done some things to help us with that, but this is a fellow that's behind the wheel, even though he lost his driver's license from a prior DUI. And one of the people that was involved in this described the effect of the K2 on him, which he felt like the ribs in his chest were coming out through his skin. So why somebody would smoke that and get behind a wheel, I can't tell you, but we did also hear that it wasn't coming up on the tests from probation, which he was on at the time. So, a drug that he could potentially get away with. So on March 4th, 2013, 40-year-old mother of 2 small children named Miranda Thompson out for an afternoon run in her neighborhood in Limerick when she was struck and killed by an 18-year-old named Justin Jackson. Jackson had just smoked marijuana after getting out of high school, got into his Ford Focus, texting also, he crosses over the oncoming lane of traffic. She's running, against traffic, a safe position, and he crosses over, struck her at a high rate of speed, crashed into a telephone pole. He pled guilty to homicide by vehicle, driving under the influence of a controlled substance, and a number of other charges. I could go on all day with you and tell tragic story after tragic story of people that we are seeing under the influence of drugs. And so when I talk about the dangerousness, I use those examples to reiterate just a few of the tragedies we're seeing here in Montgomery County. There are many, many more, and they illustrate the fact that the DUI offender comes from all walks of life, comes from all income levels, comes from all areas of our county and our state. It also illustrates that DUI offenses and especially drug driving have an ability to quickly and permanently cause devastation to multiple families. The crash I started out with, the police went to the father's home, knocked on his door, said, "Your daughter's been in a crash." He said, "No, she's sleeping upstairs." And they said, "Go check." She wasn't. She had snuck out and was on the road in Pottstown. I went to the funeral. I saw the devastation to, so many kids and so many families, and that's just a part of all of the events that transpire and affect, someone with so much potential that could have done so much. So the danger to the community is always on the forefront when we're looking at these DUI prosecutions, and we applaud the officers that are able to, stop somebody who's driving under the influence before it comes to these tragic consequences. And our primary goal is to get the unsafe driver off the road and to stop him or her from continuing to drive under the influence. Under current law, police have a 2-hour window at the time of the stop to get a blood sample. Delaware, our adjoining state, by comparison, has a 4-hour time frame at the time of driving to get that testing done. So extending Pennsylvania's window would give police more time to obtain search warrants. 2 recent pieces of Pennsylvania legislation will change the landscape. As discussed before, the new ignition interlock, set to go into effect in August of 2017. Real chance to not only decrease DUI recidivism and reduce delay, but also create a change in behavior. But ignition interlock has a loophole that you may consider for a legislative fix. The way it's written, the DUI offenders, regardless of whether it's DUI, for alcohol and drugs, are eligible for the interlock device. But the interlock technology doesn't deal with drugs, and it can't stop a drug driver from getting behind the wheel high on marijuana, cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, or whatever drug that they may be taking in order to pass the ignition interlock blow test. So a fix that is possible for those who incur a license suspension for DUI drug driving should not be eligible for the interlock ignition program. The other thing I think you're going to be facing is legislation that impacts DUI drug prosecutions with the Medical Marijuana Act, proceeding toward a late 2017, early 2018 launch. Currently, marijuana is classified as a Schedule I controlled substance, which means that any amount of a driver's system is a violation of the DUI statute. And as we work through the new law, there's 2 legislative issues with that. First, the DUI statute will have to be amended to have a provision of non-prescribed Schedule I drug to accommodate those who have valid medical marijuana. And secondly, the statute will have to address the issue of marijuana levels, which would mean somebody is driving impaired regardless of whether they are legally taking medical marijuana. The medical marijuana patient who is driving impaired would be able to be prosecuted for DUI under the general impairment classification, and it would be helpful to set a level that distinguished one from the other. Since Pennsylvania is not the first to enact this legislation, you can look at some of the other states, California, where medical marijuana is legal. The vehicle code simply says it's unlawful for a person who is under the influence of any drug or drug to drive a vehicle. It's important that that we have effective DUI prosecution, and that starts with quality police work and officers to recognize impaired drivers. Currently, officers receive limited training at the police academy regarding DUI offenses, and I think at this point, only one of our municipal police officers in Montgomery County is trained as a DRE. So we hope that some of the minimum standards that are set will include both standards field sobriety testing as well as ARIDE, Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement Training. Would provide help to that, and giving new police officers the skills to identify the 7 major categories of depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, inhalants, cannabis, and others. So I'll conclude by saying that stopping drug driving is, after all, the goal.
As chiefs of small departments with 18 officers, the difficulty we have is money, training, and the time that is necessary to effect an arrest. And when you have maybe 2 officers working, now you're just taking one of them and possibly both of them off the road for hours. Who's going to answer a call when this happens? And that is a problem we have, and it's a very difficult one to solve. But I'm going to turn it over to Officer Evard here to give you his testimony and his perspective on this.
Most of us, when we come across something, somebody, we know they're on something. We might not know what, but you can just tell that guy's on something, which is why the ARIDE training is very important. I took it earlier this year. It's a fantastic course. I encourage anybody who has the opportunity to take it. And it's not just good for DUIs. It's good for domestics, sporting events, any other time where we come in contact with somebody who we think they're on something. We can, with our training, determine or come to an idea of what they're on and maybe decide how they might react as the incident progresses. But as Chief Kenny said, one of our issues with our department is staffing. We're a smaller department. We have squads of 3, and depending on vacations and sickness call-outs and all that, a lot of times we have 2 people working. So think about 10 o'clock on a Friday night in the middle of a tropical storm, and a drunk driver hits a tree. Now what are we going to do? Most DUIs take 2 people, if not more. If it's a crash, it does take more. DUIs take, if you're lucky, an hour to process and to get them turned over to somebody else or lodged. If you're not lucky, it's going to be longer than that. But think about that's 2 hours. In our department, if there's 2 people working, that's 2 hours the streets aren't being patrolled, 2 hours that calls aren't being handled, and 2 hours where we're interacting with somebody that could potentially become a violent person. One of the benefits that we have is the Fast Track Center. And for those that aren't familiar with it, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department offers a DUI Fast Track Center. It's basically a drop and go. You arrest your drunk, you take them up there, turn them over to sheriffs. Sheriffs will take care of the processing, lodging, getting a ride home. In a couple days, you'll get the paperwork with what blood alcohol concentration they blew. It's very convenient for us. Take them up, drop them off, back to your town, back to patrol. The disadvantage of that is the Fast Track Centers are only available Friday and Saturday nights from certain hours, from I think 8 o'clock till, Chief, do you remember the hours?
They were until 5 in the morning.
5 in the morning now. They extended that recently, but only on Friday, Saturday nights. Another disadvantage is the Fast Track Centers are only breath. So if we suspect drugs or only drugs or the combination, you're not going to get that at the Fast Track Center. What you're going to see is you risk officers who will arrest somebody. We know we have them on alcohol. We suspect drugs. But because of the ease of Fast Track, because there's only 2 people working, because it's a Friday night in the middle of a tropical storm, we're going to use Fast Track instead of going for blood. So the DUI that now is alcohol and blood is just going to be alcohol, because that's what we have with 2 people and the opportunities or the locations we have to take them. Any other time when you have a DUI, you have the hospital. And this is where I'm going to start reading. It's easier. When Fast Track's not available or we believe suspects under the influence of a controlled substance, we take them to the hospital. They're paraded through the emergency room, secured in a private room. While we're there, even though we're there for blood, the nurses take a pulse, blood pressure, temperature, do a full head-to-toe diagnostic on them. If they were involved in a crash, the doctor has to see them before they'll be released. It's not uncommon for us to be at the hospital for over an hour with a simple DUI arrest. A lot of times, again, with our department, if there's only 2 of us working, that's me there at the hospital with the suspect while we have 1 person back covering the town. Another issue we face, especially with the hospital, is officer safety, and it's important to bring this up. It's important to understand the dangers that we face. Hopefully, unfortunately, you might have heard about Officer Brian Gregg of the Newtown Borough Police Department. On September 29th, 2005, Officer Gregg arrested Robert Floor for DUI and transported him to St. Mary's Medical Center for a blood draw. While there, Floor grabbed another officer's weapon and fired 5 times, killing Officer Gregg and wounding another officer and a medical technician. Unfortunately, what happened to Officer Gregg is not an isolated incident. Taking a prisoner to a hospital should be the exception rather than common practice. Prisoners are not safe. Drunks are not predictable. Hospitals are not secure. And right about when we get to the hospital is when the drunk realizes that they're going to lose their job. They're going to lose their car. They're going to lose their license. They're going to lose their house. They're going to lose their wife. That's when they become angry, desperate, and violent. So you ask, why are we taking an unsafe, unpredictable drunk who's angry, desperate, and violent to an unsecure location like a hospital? And the answer is that's really our only option. I believe one way we can overcome some of these challenges is to streamline the process. For starters, the Fast Track Center, 24 hours, 7 days a week, all year round, but not just for alcohol, for drugs. If I arrest somebody in the middle of the day, I can take them to Fast Track, I can drop them off. It doesn't matter if it's alcohol, drugs, refusal, non-refusal. They can be lodged, they can have their a ride arranged for them, and that gets me back onto the street. Another one, I understand there was legislation introduced recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, that would allow paramedics to draw blood for a DUI. I've been an EMT for 25 years. I've been in the back of the ambulance with DUIs. I've been in the back of the ambulance with DUIs as a police officer. The equipment used by the paramedics is the same equipment used in an emergency room. One advantage of allowing EMS to draw blood is that the officer can get blood sample while on the scene before a sample is compromised by any medication administered by EMS or the hospital. Additional advantage is that an officer can request EMS respond to the station where blood can be drawn in a secure environment, or an officer can take the prisoner to the ambulance squad. Both instances provide a location much more safe and secure than the public hospital environment. Another one, this is kind of outside the box, but train police officers to draw blood. Like I said, I've been with EMS for 25 years. There's many police officers who are paramedics on a side job. They have the ability to do it. That might not be practical out here where we have a hospital or EMS squad on every other block, but when you look at the other parts of the state where they don't have that convenience, it might be a benefit to them to allow the officers to draw blood.
We talk about training, we talk about detection, we talk about the logistics of making the arrest and getting the blood and going through the legal process. There's a lot of moving parts here. And I think we need to, what we need to do, and what I want to emphasize is that this is going to be this needs to be a multi-pronged approach throughout the criminal justice system. I commend the committee for having various parts of the criminal justice system here, because you heard the different parts and how they relate to the different challenges. And it's comforting to me to know my things I looked at as a challenge, the other parts of the criminal justice system are seeing it as well. So that tells us that maybe there is some way, if we think outside the box, as the officer said, maybe we can have an effect on some of these problems. Just something to think about with training. There is a lot of funding for training, and there's a lot of push and funding for the DUID training. I have a 23 officer department. Through very diligent efforts of my lieutenant and myself, we've been able to get 90% of our department SFST trained, standard field sobriety testing. We've been able to get 50% A-RIDE trained, but we haven't gotten any past that, and we haven't been able to get anyone DRE trained. it's a major commitment to get some of this training done, because there's all kinds of other mandatory training that we must also, get scheduled and get done. Every time you put an officer in training, you take that officer off the schedule. Now somebody's got to work that officer's shift. If you're a very small department, and happens a lot of times in my case, I got to bring somebody in overtime to cover that officer's zone. Well, now it's costing me in salary double time and a half to send that officer to training, because I'm paying the one officer straight time and the other one time and a half. Budget's already strapped. It's pretty hard to get that done. So these are some of the examples of the problems that we have. I think if we look at the whole system of how we do things, maybe we can expand the fast track centers, get some of our other law enforcement and criminal justice partners in line, and all work together with the help of the legislature. We may be able to overcome some of these challenges. Thank you.
I like the idea of drawing the blood right at the scene. I think that's a great idea, but it seems as though you'd have to have a warrant to do that. How easy or hard is it to get a warrant to do that? Anybody want to answer that one?
I think I could answer that. Just the officer has to, so in the midst of maybe having a traffic accident and having now a person that he's arresting for DUID, someone's got to watch the prisoner, somebody's got to take care of the traffic accident. He's got to go back to the station, type out the warrant. Now there's technology that we could probably do it from the car, but now we've got to hope that we can get the judge to approve the warrant. And as District Attorney Steele's talked about, all this time that's going on, the window is getting, that 2-hour window is getting more and more compressed. And it's very difficult at 3 o'clock in the morning to get a search warrant approved while you have all these other, moving parts going on.
Especially in a smaller department. Would the 4-hour window help you? Although I know also that alcohol goes up and down over that time. I assume drugs react similarly. I mean, the amount in your bloodstream.
The 4-hour window would certainly be helpful from a legal standpoint. I would have to defer to the doctor as far as the toxicological effect of it. But we've seen, depending when you encounter the person with alcohol, obviously, you don't know if they're on their way up or on their way down. And that's where the whole 2-hour window came in, trying to nail down, how long ago did they drink? So is their blood alcohol climbing? Or are we getting them at the end and now they're going down, so by the time we get them to the hospital, now they're no longer over the BAC.
Right.
So it's a difficult process. Search warrants, it sounds simple, but it's not, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning, that easy to get a search warrant.
Right, that sounds like expert testimony, but the more difficult problem is the one Officer Ebert pointed out, which is you're lucky if you only have a drunk in a tree. What if you have some other car full of people who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? So you got to take care of them first. I would imagine, Officer, you want to address that?
Fortunately, we have a good relationship with all our neighboring departments. We have mutual aid. If we need help, they're right there for us, and the same thing when they need help. Unfortunately for that, though, is that by calling them into our town, now that depletes their resources. That's one less officer in their town. That's one less person covering their street. So we manage. All departments that have 2, 3, 4, however many people on a squad do manage.
Okay,
Very
hence
well.
to the point that the fast track system is a good idea and probably should be expanded.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't cover on here is fast track is Friday, Saturday nights. That's great. You think about alcohol, Friday, Saturday night parties, Monday night football. You can figure Monday night the Eagles are playing. You're going to have some departments that are busier because people are out at the bars. But your drugs aren't Friday, Saturday night. Your drug users are 24/7. So fast track's great for Monday, Tuesday night, but when your drugs are 24/7, what do you do that? And again, that's all you have is the hospital.
Well, that's all the time we have for this month's program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. If you have questions about what you just saw, or if I can help you with any state government related matter, please contact me at my district office through my website or follow me on Facebook. The information will appear on your screen in just a moment. Thanks for watching. Please join me next time for Legislative Report.